everyone. This is the Coordinating Center for the National Drug Early Warning System, sponsored by the National Institute on Drug Abuse, and we welcome you to this first of a special series of NDEWS Presents webinars highlighting global drug early warning systems. The NDEWS PI is Dr. Eric Wish, and our NIDA project scientist is Moira O'Brien. I believe that both of them are in our audience today. My name is Erin Artigiani. You may know me from the NDEWS network. And Barbara Kerr, Marwa Al-Nasir, and I will be the facilitators for this webinar. We are all part of the NDEWS Coordinating Center team. For those who are interested, you can find detailed information about NDEWS, recordings of prior webinars, and invitations to future webinars on our website at ndews.org. We have a number of webinars coming up in this series and in our regular NDEWS Present series, so I hope you'll be able to join us in them as well. And you will also find on our website instructions for how to join our NDEWS network and participate in ongoing discussions with more than 1,600 experts and concerned citizens from across the United States and approximately 20 other countries. This webinar will feature Dr. David Newcombe from the University of Auckland, representing GDEWS, the Global Drug Early Warning System Project, and experts from Canada and the United States describing the methods used in their drug early warning systems, the challenges and successes they have encountered, and the lessons they have learned. It will be approximately 90 minutes in length, and we encourage you to submit questions during and after the presentations. Please post your questions in the Q&A box that you will see, and we will hold a brief Q&A session after each of our presentations. And our panelists, Barbara, Marwa, and I will do our best to get to all of your questions, and hopefully we'll be able to do that today. But if we don't, we will also post a transcript of the Q&A with complete answers on the website, along with a copy of the recording of this webinar and the slides for each of the presenters. So thank you. We hope you will enjoy this webinar. And I now am very pleased to introduce Dr. David Newcombe, a senior lecturer for alcohol and drug studies in the School of Population Health and the Center for Addiction Research at the University of Auckland. He is going to provide you with an overview of the mission and goals of GDEWS, and then we'll hear from our colleagues in Canada, and then I'll be back on again to tell you a little bit about the National Drug Early Warning System and how we do things here in the United States. So. All right. So David, I think you can share your screen and pull up your PowerPoint.
Is that working?
Yes, we can see it.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Erin, and kia ora and greetings from New Zealand. I'd also like to welcome you all to the first webinar in this series looking at and examining global drug early warning systems. It's certainly a great honor to be here talking to you about this project, GDEWS, that we're very excited about, and we believe that it has a lot of value. So again, welcome. In the time that I've got talking to you here, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the Global Drug Early Warning System, or GDEWS for short, that we've developed. So GDEWS is a collaborative project. It's a product of collaborations between researchers from the University of Auckland and the Center for Addiction Research there, and researchers from the Center for Substance Abuse Research, CESAR, at the University of Maryland at College Park. So just to give a bit of background as to the context as to how this project came about. So New Zealand, like many countries, jurisdictions around the world, has seen an upsurge in the appearance of new psychoactive substances, and also the use. So just recently we have had a suspected spurge of approximately 10 deaths from, we think, synthetic cannabinoids the last few weeks. So whilst we do have mechanisms to monitor trends in illicit and illicit drug use, we don't have a coordinated way of identifying new psychoactive substances and to disseminate this information in a timely fashion. So there is a large group of people in New Zealand looking at scoping what a New Zealand drug early warning system might look like, and eventually to establish such a system. And so as part of this activity, researchers from the University of Auckland have been working with researchers at CESAR to think about projects that might help the development of drug early warning systems, particularly in New Zealand. One of those projects was an initiative to submit an application to the NIDA, the National Institute on Drug Abuse, Distinguished International Scientist Award, DISCA, to allow me to work with researchers at CESAR examining drug early warning systems. So I'd really like to acknowledge NIDA for their support to allow this project to go on. So the project is designed to examine some existing drug early warning systems or monitoring systems. The idea is to gain an understanding of how they work. We have chosen what we think are a nice variety of systems from different contexts, the different complexities. The idea is to look at areas of best practice. The final, I guess the ultimate goal is to develop guidance based on proven practice utilized by these systems to support countries that are looking at establishing new drug early warning systems. So the project plan is to undertake a series of webinars, the first of which this is. We're asking key persons or key people from each systems to describe the state of art that the system employs, to monitor drug trends, to get an understanding of how they measure risk and disseminate information. We're also asking them to reflect on lessons learned and how they might move forward as we, throughout the world, we're experiencing this increase in new psychoactive substance use. So just to kind of summarize the outcomes, the webinars are certainly an important part. So we have got a series of 4 planned webinars featuring North American systems, Australasian, African, and European systems. So we do recommend, and we do hope that you will join us for those. Where we'll be asking and working with presenters on a series of peer review articles, and importantly, a chapter or resource on what are considered best practices and guidelines for setting up a new drug early warning system. So with regard to this webinar, we've selected 2 systems from North America, and we'll be soon hearing from Drs. Matthew Young and Zachary Patterson from the Canadian Centre on Substance Use and Addiction, talking about the Canadian Community Epidemiological Network on Drug Use. And then also Erin Artigiani will be talking about the National Drug Early Warning System as well, which some of you may be aware of, but it's a very comprehensive system as well. So I'll hand over to Erin now. Thank you very much, and I hope you do enjoy this webinar.
All right, thank you, David, for that introduction and overview of GDEWS. And I now am very pleased and excited to introduce Dr. Matthew Young and Dr. Zachary Patterson, who are at the Canadian Centre of Substance Use and Addiction, and they're going to talk to us about their monitoring system and sentinel surveillance efforts that they conduct as a part of the Canadian Community Epidemiology Network on Drug Use. So take. So Matthew, you need to also unmute yourself. Can I unmute him?
It's
there you go.
Can you hear me now? Great.
Yes.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody. So thanks for the opportunity to present on the Canadian Community Epidemiology Network on Drug Use. I'm going to tell you quite a lot about it. I'm going to hand it off to my partner, Zach Patterson, midway through. I'd like to start by just saying that in Canada, we don't really have a kind of a central early warning system. There are a lot of people doing a lot of different pieces that, that inform early warning activities, but we are we're a network that does mainly exchanges information on new drugs and new drug use trends and what can be done to intervene and try and reduce harms associated with these trends. So that'll become a little bit more apparent as we move through the presentation. So to begin with, here's the presentation overview. We're going to talk a little bit about who the organization is that runs CENDU. That's the Canadian Centre on Substance Use and Addiction. Then we're going to talk a little bit, just to give some context to our system, a little bit about Canada. The general field of what monitoring new drugs in Canada, what the kinds of data that are available. And then we're going to talk about sentinel surveillance in Canada, of which we would consider the Canadian Community Epidemiology Network on Drug Use, which I'm not going to say anymore, and I'm going to instead use the acronym CENDU. Talk a little bit about CENDU, what it is and how it works, some of the alerts and bulletins we have issued, the impact that it's had in the Canadian landscape, as well as current initiatives that we're engaged in, as well as some advantages and disadvantages of this model and lessons learned. So let's continue then. So it's important for us to let everybody know that this work is made possible through our financial contributions from Health Canada, but the views and expressed herein do not necessarily reflect the views of Health Canada. So the Canadian Centre on Substance Use and Addiction is an organization that we're a not-for-profit, and as Zach will describe a bit later on, this provides us some unique opportunities as well, but also has some disadvantages in how our network operates. We were created by an act of Parliament in just over 25 years ago to address substance use in Canada. We operate in a number of different areas, and this kind of area, more generally, we call monitoring and surveillance is one of those areas. But we also do engage in a lot of knowledge exchange efforts on the topic of, on a wide variety of topics, as you can see here. So Canada, I'm going to hit a couple of pieces that I think are pertinent to the discussion today. So we're a country of only 35 million people, but we have one of the largest land masses in the world. Most of the individuals in Canada are concentrated along the border bordering the United States to the south. We have one of the highest per capita immigration rates in the world. We are the majority English speaking, but we have a large French speaking population. So all of our alerts and bulletins need to be in both official languages. We have 6 different time zones, 1 land border. We have 13 different provinces and territories, and this is important because a lot of the data that informs the work that we do is created for administrative purposes within each of the provinces and territories, and therefore isn't necessarily easy to aggregate in a meaningful way because the data is collected differently. So this results in large differences in data collection across the different provinces, and trying to harmonizing this data or standardizing this data can be a very onerous process. But there are activities going on to try and standardize and harmonize some of this data. We also have different police forces, provincial police forces, as well as one national police force, and healthcare is administered at the provincial level. A little bit about drug use. I can skip over this a bit. Suffice to say that for those of you outside of North America, you might not be aware, we are in the midst of what has been considered called an opioid crisis. There is a previous webinar that we conducted with our partners in Canada on the opioid crisis in Canada. This was largely kind of arose from the early 2000s, where there was increased amount of prescription opioid use. Recently, there has been other illicit opioids that have made their way into the and are being sold instead of diverted prescription opioids, making people less and less certain of what they're taking and how much they're taking, and resulting in an increase in overdose deaths in Canada. So what are the data sources that we use to monitor new drug trends in Canada? This isn't a comprehensive list, but it is probably some of the main ones, and I'd like to give credit to our partners who are conducting some of this work. So we have self-report surveys. That's not really a leading edge indicator, but that's being conducted by Health Canada. We have efforts by the Health Canada's Drug Analysis Service to better share seizure data, much like is done with the National Forensic Laboratory System data in the States. We have some internet monitoring that goes on with Health Canada, looking at the kinds of drugs and different novel psychoactive substances that are for sale to Canada. We have opioid overdose surveillance that's currently being conducted by the Public Health Agency of Canada and Canadian Institute for Health Information. This is a relatively newer initiative that is trying to get real-time data on opioid overdose deaths. And this is largely in response to the current opioid crisis that we're experiencing right now. There's also another initiative taking place conducted by Health Canada and the Canadian Surveillance System for Poison Information, which is trying to pull together poison exposure estimates from across Canada, because right now, similar to other administrative data, these are conducted at the provincial level, and the data has not been standardized or harmonized. And so this activity is ongoing, and we anxiously awaiting when that is completed, because we do know how important the poison center exposure data is for the NDEWS, for our partners to the south in the United States. But what I'm going to talk about today is a sentinel surveillance system, which is also, I would argue, is not only a sentinel surveillance system, but it's also I think is an effective knowledge exchange network as well. And that's the Canadian Community Epidemiology Network on Drug Use. So CENDU was initially actually based on, it's been around since about in the 1990s. It was originally based on the Community Epidemiology Work Group that was in the United States for some time. Members of the Canadian Center on Substance Use and Addiction, we would attend these meetings, and they were a really valuable source of information. So we looked to kind of replicate certain aspects of how that working group operated here in Canada, but with some differences. Now, this slide shows a map of Canada. This gives you an indication of where our Sentinel sites are located. We have almost all provinces and territories. There are some missing. It's a mixture of site representatives that represent provinces, and then sometimes they will represent municipalities. So some of the larger municipalities, for example, Toronto, Montreal, they have site representatives that really talk about or share information regarding what is going on at the municipal level with other network members. Other provinces, such as Alberta or Newfoundland and Labrador, they really kind of represent the entire province. So the other thing is, so what we do in the network is we try and encourage quality or good local level monitoring of drug use trends. And this is not only using quantitative data, which we encourage, but also qualitative data. So we have developed resources for each individual site coordinator, and have suggestions for who kind of within each network they should kind of create relationships with. You can see these over on the right-hand side of your screen. These include law enforcement, people, first responders, healthcare practitioners, treatment providers, people who use drugs, those working in harm reduction programs. Because we've found that oftentimes some of the first indications of a new drug trend associated with harms really comes from these anecdotal reports that then need to be corroborated with data. And so each of these site coordinators or members of the network kind of they look within their jurisdiction, and they will report up if they see something happening, and then we'll ask around the network to see whether or not other people are seeing the same things. If there is something that we think is worthy of alerting the network to, we will then engage in a process whereby we'll collect information from each of the site coordinators and then develop alerts and bulletins to be issued out to the network. I'm gonna so this is a really busy slide, and if you feel like taking a look at it on your own at another time, that's fine. This is really to illustrate that one of the first things that we did when we developed kind of a standard operating procedure, because we needed to create trust among our partners. So if the partners were going to provide us anecdotal reports or some sensitive data, they needed to know that we weren't going to, that we were going to handle it responsibly. We weren't just going to go out to the media. We weren't going to mischaracterize it. So we developed this kind of operating procedure. So when we hear, if we hear of a new kind of phenomenon or a new trend that we would like to get some information out to the network, we have a standard operating procedure. We will issue a request for information. That information will come in from all of the network representatives. Each network representative, then we take their information and we kind of put it into, we repackage it, put it into a format where it will work in the bulletin, and then we go back out to them for them to give it their seal of approval. If we don't hear from them, we don't include their information. Then eventually we pull it all together. The final bulletin where all the representatives' information is aggregated together goes out to the full network, and then we don't expect them to give their active consent. Then we assume that if they don't respond, that they're okay with it. Then we have to translate it into both official languages, and we release it through our website and out to people who subscribe to receive alerts and bulletins. So I can give you now, I'll go fairly quickly through the next few slides because these are the alerts and bulletins that we have issued to date. In 2012, we issued an alert on bath salts. This was with our old branding and our old logo. Then we issued an alert in early 2013 on the misuse of opioids in Canadian communities. This was followed by an alert in mid-2013 on our first kind of glimpse where we saw powdered fentanyl, that we had reports. And I think this is where I think we kind of we detected this quite early. One of the things I always like to talk about with a network like this is that in order for an early warning system to be effective, it's kind of like a good metaphor is like a smoke detector. You need to be able to detect what's happening, but you also need to be able to ring loud enough that people can engage in the appropriate actions that they need to do. So in the case of a smoke detector, to escape the building or the house. In this case, at the time, we didn't have very many people who had subscribed to receive our alerts and bulletins. So while we detected this and we knew that it was an issue, the network was quite clear that this was something that had the potential to cause a great deal of harm. I don't think we really got the message out as well as we could have because people didn't know really who we were, and a lot of people hadn't subscribed to the alerts and bulletins. Moving forward, another bulletin. In 2014, we released an alert on the increasing availability of counterfeit oxycodone tablets containing fentanyl, which the network also saw as having the potential for a great amount of harm, and which unfortunately came to pass. Synthetic cannabinoids, drug-related harms at music festivals. And then in 2015, one of the problems with reporting drug-related deaths in Canada is that all the coroners and medical examiners all were operated independently, and their data was not really pooled very often. So up until 2014, we didn't have very good statistics on drug-related deaths in Canada. So for this one, we knew that there was a mounting death toll related that was associated with fentanyl use. And so we went out to each individual coroner and medical examiner in Canada and pulled together this bulletin. And as you can see from the number of downloads, which was about almost 45,000, it had an impact, and I think it drew attention to the issue. And it's something that I think shows the value of a network such as this. This is a paper we released on the value of early warning in the Canadian Journal of Addiction. And then we've kind of continued doing the same kinds of alerts and bulletins. One of the other elements I think that is really key in our network, at least, is not only talking about new drug trends, but also talking about what are some of the interventions that are taking place, and who's doing them, and what's the overall landscape of of what's being done in Canada to reduce these harms. So in 2016, we released a bulletin looking at the availability of take-home naloxone in Canada, and this kind of was a province-by-province snapshot of, how's it made available, what is it by prescription only, what programs are in place to be able to provide people take-home naloxone, etc. In the same year, we released a bulletin on novel synthetic opioids in counterfeit pharmaceuticals and other illicit street drugs. We released a bulletin on calling 911 in drug poisoning situations, showing that many individuals were not calling 911 because they were afraid of being arrested. And then most recently, we released a bulletin on substance use harms at Canadian music festivals, and Zach will talk a little bit more about that when I hand over the presentation to him. This is a kind of a rough sketch of just how many subscribers that we received, that have voluntarily subscribed to receive these bulletins. We're up to about 1,500 right now, which we're very happy with. This is a breakdown of this, who is subscribed by a sector. It's a bit rough, but it gives a bit of an idea. Most of the individuals are in the public health departments, but there's also been a significant percentage, about 20% from pharmacy, and I think this is probably as a result of the history of the opioid crisis in Canada. It's also, our CENDU bulletins have also had a fair amount of impact in the media. We've had over 850 media stories published that refer to CENDU alerts and bulletins. They've collectively been downloaded from our website about 125,000 times. I think really this is just to kind of illustrate that when we began kind of issuing these alerts and bulletins, it kind of satisfied an information gap. People were interested in this kind of information. The other thing that I thought was beneficial to I think that worked quite well is we always, in constructing our alerts and bulletins, we remain fairly neutral. We always talk about just what is the data, and we were quite pleased at different organizations referring to our alerts and bulletins, as diverse as harm reduction programs to law enforcement and other groups as well. So that's it for me. I'm going to hand things over to Zach because I've been working on the project for quite some time, but Zach has recently stepped in to take over leadership of the network, and he's going to talk a little bit about current initiatives and what's being done next.
Great. Thank you, Matthew. Hi, everyone. My name is Zach Patterson, and I'm happy to take over this presentation here and tell you guys a little bit about what we're up to now in the CENDU network, and also some of the advantages and disadvantages and lessons learned that we've sort of accumulated over time. As Matthew mentioned, we just a couple weeks ago released a bulletin on substance-related harms at Canadian music festivals, which was really aimed at taking a sort of a snapshot of what substance-related harms have occurred this summer at Canadian music festivals. And our intention is to follow that bulletin up with a more comprehensive look at substance-related harms over the entire summer. And so we'll hopefully be following that bulletin up in the fall. As you see on this slide, we are currently working to strengthen, to both grow and strengthen the network in terms of national representation, so ensuring that we have a CENDU site coordinator in each province and territory, and then working with those colleagues to build capacity within their jurisdictional networks so that they're able to collect data, so that they have representation from all of the key stakeholders that have access to this information, and then working on our lines of communication so that we're able to, to reach out to those site coordinators, collect the information, and move along in a timely fashion. So we're happy that we've added a few new site coordinators in the last couple of months. We just had an in-person meeting with the network a few months ago, and so things are rolling pretty nicely for us right now, and we're happy with where the network is at. So one of the things that we do on our end is, sharing contacts if we have them, working on relationship building and trust building in those relationships, developing terms of reference where needed, and all of this sort of in-kind support that helps our site coordinators build the capacity within their networks. That's something that CCSA does. So current initiatives continued. We are also looking to update a 2015 bulletin on that tried to quantify the number of deaths involving fentanyl in Canada. So this bulletin captured data from 2009 to 2014, and so we're sort of in need of finding updated information on deaths involving fentanyl. The bulletin that we released in 2015 has been downloaded over 44,000 times and had over 650 media stories. So it was a very timely, very relevant bulletin with high impact. And so we are working very closely with our colleagues at the Public Health Agency of Canada, at Health Canada, and the Canadian Institute for Health Information to get together and figure out how we can better quantify deaths involving fentanyl in Canada, and then using the CENDU network as that megaphone to sort of get the word out, and so really sort of leaning on the knowledge exchange side of the CENDU network to push that bulletin out as far as and wide as we can. So a couple of advantages of a sentinel surveillance network like CENDU is it's relatively inexpensive, and obviously when referring to cost, it's always relative. So on our end, we have the portion of mine and Matthew's and my colleague Bridget, who's sitting here as well, the portion of our salaries that are dedicated to this project is obviously a cost. We typically host one in-person meeting per fiscal year. The network, and that is also a cost to the network. And then basically leaning on our volunteer network across the country to help us collect and disseminate information. So relatively inexpensive. It's not free, but we believe it's doable. It has a high degree of sensitivity, this CENDU. We're able to get qualitative data that helps us put the quantitative data into context. So sometimes it's the numbers only tell you so much of the story, and having a network that is based on relationship and based on communications with people in jurisdictions, you get this really rich qualitative data to complement and ground and contextualize the quantitative data. And so we're able to detect the presence of trends when they do happen, and so you do have this high degree of sensitivity in the sentinel surveillance system. It's flexible, so we are a rather small unit. We are able to be nimble and sort of move in the direction that the data is telling us to move in. And just sort of thinking off the top of my head, when we set out to release the substance-related harms at music festivals bulletin, sort of in our mind, or at least in my mind, it was looking like it was going to be one thing. But then when we started doing our outreach and data collection, it became very obvious that sort of the storyline was something completely different than what I thought it was going to be. And so our network is, you can very easily sort of pivot and follow what the data is telling us and what the trends are. And so we do have that degree of flexibility. We aren't, you know, too heavily weighed down by bureaucracy and processes, that we can, like I said, we can be nimble, we can be flexible, and we think that's an advantage of the network. I mentioned the in-depth, meaningful, qualitative data. That is, I don't think that happens overnight. That is a product of a lot of the work that Matthew has done over the last 5-6 years in developing these relationships with folks. And really, as Matthew mentioned, it's a matter of establishing that trust that, you know, information that they send us, we're not trying to posterize anyone and you know, push things out on social media that shouldn't be out there. So it does take time to develop those relationships and build that trust. But when you do reach that point, you get incredibly rich qualitative data that again helps you contextualize some of the quantitative data. And then partnerships and at the community, provincial, territorial, and national level happen to be, you know, the backbone of how an organization like CCSA operates. And I'm talking, you know, beyond the monitoring surveillance file. A lot of the work we do is in partnerships. And so, you know, establishing those sort of helps the organization's mandate as well. So those are some of the advantages of a sentinel surveillance system such as SENDU. Some of the disadvantages is that the specificity is not as strong as the sensitivity. We are unable to identify the absence of a trend that is not there. So the specificity is just not as strong as the sensitivity in this network. We find that there's a large diversity in the capacity at each of our sites across the country. Some sites, for example, are very well equipped, very well resourced, and able to collect and report on data, you know, very easily. And other sites, for example, are not as equipped, or they haven't been doing monitoring surveillance for as long, and there's not, you know, maybe there's not the number of people at the table, and so you get this diversity, this heterogeneity of reporting from each site coordinator. And so sometimes that is a challenge for us when we're trying to sort of pull all this data together to make a story, and you're comparing apples to oranges. You have stronger data from some jurisdictions than others, and so sometimes that becomes a challenge. SENDU is a volunteer network, so that means that we're leaning on volunteers, that we're leaning on people that might be doing this work off the side of their desk. In some cases, being a SENDU member is directly in line with their job. In other cases, it's not, and they might not be so interested, or they might not be focused on this aspect of their job. And so I think anytime you're dealing with volunteer network, you know, there's some inherent challenges that go along with that. Sensitivities around data sharing and information sharing. Again, I doubt that's unique to SENDU or any sentinel surveillance system. I think that's a global challenge in our field, but certainly we do run into that. There is always sensitivities around data sharing, especially when it comes to you know, overdose deaths or something like that. There's some necessary sensitivities, but that is a challenge for us. And then finally, being a non-government, non-profit organization, we tend to have barriers to accessing non-public information. Again, you know, SENDU's been around for a long time. Matthew's developed a lot of really strong relationships, which helps us overcome some of these barriers to accessing non-public information. But if we turned around tomorrow and created SENDU from scratch, you know, those relationships wouldn't exist, and it would be very challenging for us to access that information. Now, there's sort of two sides to SENDU. One is the data collection side, and so having that barrier is really on the data collection side. We can always lean on SENDU as a knowledge exchange platform, and it's been really successful at that. And I think that's the sort of the other half of this surveillance system that might go underappreciated. But we're able to sort of lean on that knowledge exchange piece and work with our partners who might, have access to the data. And so again, it comes down to those partnerships and relationships. Some of the lessons learned over the years, the first one we learned from our network was there's no utility in releasing a hurry up and panic bulletin without being explicit with a call to action or an appropriate response or a way to reduce harms associated with whatever whatever we're talking about at the time. But just releasing something that says, hurry up and panic doesn't have the utility and so it hinders uptake and reach of our network. So that's something that we learned early on, and we always will try to position these alerts and bulletins to say, look, this is the evidence that we have. This is what we know, and here's a response, or here's an appropriate actionable item or something like that. What we call here the quantum mechanics of surveillance. We've seen this a lot, and it's basically what we mean by that is the impact that we have in just asking questions or observing something. I can think of our take-home naloxone bulletin. We were sort of picking up the phone and doing some outreach and data collection by asking people, what does the take-home naloxone program look like in your jurisdiction or your city or your province? And just sort of the act of observing what the take-home naloxone programs look like across Canada resulted in a lot of change. And so it got people thinking, well, geez, what is the take-home naloxone program look like in our jurisdiction? And can it be improved? And what are other people doing that we might learn from or build off of? And so it wasn't so much us releasing the bulletin that led to impact, but it was more the action of conducting that research. So as it turns out, we released this bulletin and it was out of date the day it was published on our website, but that was okay to us because we felt a lot of the impact was actually in the conversations leading up to the publishing of that bulletin, which led to behavior change. It led to some impact. And then finally, and this is something that we try to be conscious of and manage, is sort of controlling the story so that it doesn't become negative and it doesn't become us comparing one jurisdiction to another or one individual to another or one music festival to another, for example. So that's not what CENDU is about. We're always trying to take a sort of step back and take a bigger picture approach, and again, just present the evidence. This is what we know, but it's not in the sense of look at how good this jurisdiction is doing and look at how bad this jurisdiction is doing. And so we have to be careful, and we've learned this over time to control the story a little bit and frame it as this is what we know, as opposed to look how great this jurisdiction is or look how poor this jurisdiction is. So those would be our sort of 3 lessons learned. So I think that's it. I understand this slide deck will be shared, which is excellent. And so in anticipation of it being shared, we have compiled some resources that we thought you folks might be interested in. Some of our most recent bulletins, for example, there's a little YouTube clip there which really speaks to the impact that a sentinel surveillance system like CENDU can have. I highly suggest looking at that short clip. It's a really good one. And then just some of the papers that we've published over the last couple of years. So if you're interested, feel free to visit those resources. This is our promotion of our Issues of Substance conference, which is happening in Alberta from November 13th to 15th. So we invite you all to register for that. It's going to be a great conference, and we're going to be talking a lot about CENDU and monitoring surveillance type stuff. So it would be great to see you there. And finally, we've included a slide with our contact information. Matthew, whom you've just met, myself, and our colleague Bridget Hall make up our sort of internal CENDU team here at CCSA. And if you did have any questions or wanted to strike up a dialogue that outside of this webinar, we would be more than happy to chat with you. So feel free to reach out and contact us. And with that, I think I'll unshare my screen here and we'll wrap it up.
Okay, thank you very much, you guys. That was a great presentation. I certainly have my work cut out for me following up what you said. You did a really great job describing your system and the lessons you've learned and the things you've done. It was very clear, very helpful, I think. We did get a question from one viewer for you guys who was wondering if you have any specific criteria for issuing a bulletin, and if so, what they are.
We've talked a lot about whether or not we should have a kind of a formal risk assessment procedure for issuing alerts and bulletins. And we've started putting one together, but we found that oftentimes, you know, for example, so bulletins tend to be kind of more, you know, not time-specific kind of issues. So more about, so for example, some of the ones we've done, you know, take-home naloxone programs in Canada, or barriers to calling 911. These are kind of more, you know, interventions, compilations of information that are kind of out there and are not really kind of time sensitive. For the other ones, I mean, we typically will have a teleconference with the partners, and we'll say, do you think this is, should we put an alert on this? And generally there tends to be unanimity about whether or not we should or we shouldn't. We haven't encountered a situation yet where there was a kind of a lot of disagreement. So we haven't really put it forth any kind of formal risk assessment protocol yet, no.
Okay, thank you. Just a reminder to our viewers, if you have a question, please take advantage of the Q&A box and type it in and submit it through that, and we will see it and get back to you. At the moment, I have one other question, Dr. Newcombe, that's actually directed towards you, and that is from a viewer who wants to know if you can give an update on New Zealand's first in the world policy allowing for identification, evaluation, and regulation of novel psychoactive substances and how it relates to GDEWS.
Thanks, Erin. That's a really good question. The new Psychoactive Substances Act is what it's called. It's been in I'm probably not the expert on this, but it's enacted. We haven't yet had, for the viewers' perspective, this is a piece of legislation which puts the onus on, I guess, proving that a new substance is low risk before it becomes regulated and legal. So currently in New Zealand, all new psychoactive substances are illegal until proven otherwise. So prior to the last election in New Zealand, the current government also put forward that no animal testing was to be permitted as part of the preclinical testing for any new substances. And that has, I guess, halted any activity around the release of new substances on the market. And so really, that's probably all I can say, because even though we have this novel, innovative piece of legislation, nothing's been passed since legislation's been put forward. So it probably doesn't have any particular part to play in an ongoing drug monitoring system per se. I'll probably leave it as that, if that's all right.
All right, thank you very much. So I'm going to share my screen now, so I can bring up my slides, and there we go. My name again is Erin Artigiani, and I am representing the Coordinating Center for the National Drug Early Warning System here in the United States. We're an example of an evolving monitoring system. And so to start with just giving you an overview of NDEWS, we are a 5-year program funded through a cooperative agreement from NIH and the National Institute on Drug Abuse. And it's something that we were awarded after a national competition. We have a project scientist at NIDA who's really our partner on this project, and we work closely with her on developing our different efforts and implementing them and writing up our results and all of those various pieces. And the Coordinating Center is based at the Center for Substance Abuse Research at the University of Maryland. So it's a university-based interdisciplinary research center where we have access to, either through our own in-house staff or through a network of collaborators that we have for NDEWS, people from a very diverse background, including demography and statistics and qualitative research and a number of other, and drug testing and a number of other fields as well. And so in general, NDEWS is a national public health surveillance system, and it evolved out of a precursor program that was also managed by NIDA, the Community Epidemiology Work Group, or CEWG, which many of you may know about. CEWG was a group of approximately 20 or so representatives from different cities around the United States who came together twice a year to meet and to share information and throw questions around, and we would do little presentations and write up annual reports about what was going on in our particular areas. And since then, we've continued to work with a lot of those representatives as a part of NDEWS and to grow and focus how we report and what we report on. And I'll get into some examples of that in a few slides. And we are using NDEWS today to generate critically needed information about drugs and their public health consequences, and to leverage resources and collaborations to harmonize approaches to analyzing and presenting data. And this basically is what NDEWS looks like. So basically this involves a combination of people, data and information, and then a variety of methods for getting it out. And so to start off with, under people, of course, we have our project scientist, Moira O'Brien at NIDA, and then we also have a scientific advisory group, which is made up of a combination of representatives from federal and non-federal agencies. That includes people from a variety of backgrounds, including public health, law enforcement, policy, toxicology, and university researchers as well. And then, of course, there's the staff here at the Coordinating Center and our various collaborators. And also very important are a couple of networks that we work with. Our own NDEWS network, which now has more than 1,600 participants, as I mentioned earlier. And it's an open network, so it includes people from a wide variety of backgrounds that I'll get to in a moment. And then, of course, we also have the network that we work with through the American Association of Poison Control Centers, which have been kind enough to be collaborators with us for the past 3 years now. We're in year 4 of our 5-year program. And so we find them very valuable to work with, because it is often the folks at the poison centers, the medical directors and educational outreach staff, who hear about things first, because they're really on the front lines. So they often hear about the early cases involving emerging drugs and shifting trends in use. And then we also have our local Sentinel epidemiologists, our local researchers and experts that we work with as a part of our Sentinel surveillance efforts. And so those activities are all a part of our initial detecting and monitoring efforts. And in addition to those people that we work with, we also are regularly reviewing a combination of national and local data sources and conducting some of our own work here at NDEWS. And so that includes looking at national sources like self-report surveys, law enforcement data, for instance, toxicology results we get from the National Forensic Laboratory Information System, and also local sources that we get directly from our Sentinel sites, which includes data on drug intoxication deaths from medical examiners and coroners, poison center calls, treatment admissions, things like that. And then some efforts that we do internally here, which include monthly news scans, where we actually have an automated process where we search on a monthly basis for approximately 30 different drug concepts, and we maintain bar charts to look at trends over time about how the media is reporting on different drugs and drug concepts. And we also have been getting involved more and more in analyses of drug terms through social media. And when we start to detect and monitor something through these efforts that I've just been mentioning, we also have the ability within NDEWS to conduct more focused follow-up studies. And that may be a targeted study where when we're writing a special report, for instance, we did one on fentanyl a couple of years ago, or it may be something where it's a hotspot study and we actually build collaborations with local researchers and go out and for instance, do a site visit where we might hit the ground and actually meet with local experts in different fields to get an idea of what they're seeing on the street, or do interviews with drug users or focus groups, or review available data, any combination of those things, or test biological specimens, urines, that we might be able to gain access to through programs, public health or law enforcement that regularly collect those specimens. And of course, with all that information coming in, we also have to have an effective way of sharing it and getting it back out and spurring discussion and conversation about what we're getting and what it means and how people can use it to respond and address what's going on in their areas. And so we do that in a variety of ways. Also, we have our NDEWS website, www.ndews.org. We are on Twitter, so at NDEWS News, so I hope that you will follow us there as well. And we do these kinds of webinars, this special series, and also our regular NDEWS Presents webinars, which give people on the network and beyond direct access to renowned experts in the field to talk about specific topics or activities or drugs and get a sense of what's going on. All of recordings of all of those webinars, as I said earlier, are available on our website. And we also do different types of publications. So while we do the longer, more detailed, in-depth scientific reports, we also have found, like Dr. Young and Dr. Patterson discussed, it to be very important to be able to produce shorter, more pithy bulletins and things like that as well, to inform people quickly about what's going on and encourage them to get more involved in the discussion. We call what we do NDEWS News, or notes from the field. And then we also, as I mentioned, are doing regular analyses, so we also are putting on our website updates of the different data indicators that we're looking at, bar charts and things like that. And so I mentioned the scientific advisory group to you briefly already, 11 non-federal members and 8 federal members. These are examples of the agencies that they represent. And the NDEWS network, people can post to it themselves, or they can respond to posts from other people. We at the Coordinating Center use it as a way to get information out, both in terms of sharing reports that we have access to through other federal agencies and for sharing reports we produce through NDEWS, but we also use it as a way to get information in, maybe by posting a query to ask people if they've seen or heard about carfentanil, for instance, in their area or something along those lines. It's also a way for people out in the field to join cross-disciplinary discussions and help shape how we talk and think about substance use and abuse in the United States, and to learn and share information about new resources and successful local solutions. So we have a number of participants, for instance, who will share articles that they publish in scientific journals or local public health announcements and things like that, that they have put out based on what they're seeing in their area. It's also a resource that people can log into, for instance, if they're a practitioner and they hear a new term they're not familiar with in a group. They can log on and ask the network, and they will generally get multiple responses from people about what it could mean or where they could learn more about it. This is an example of the data sources that we look at. Now, as I mentioned, it's a combination of national and local sources. We have that similar kind of criteria in mind that Dr. Young and Dr. Patterson talked about, in that we are also looking for data that is valid, that is consistent, that is sensitive, meaning we're looking for data that is collected the same way over an extended period of time so that we can look at it on a national level, a regional level, or even a sub-state level, and we can detect change over time, and that is specific enough that we can look at specific drugs, or at least categories of drugs. And so what I have on the screen here is an example of a kind of report that is produced. This actually is produced by a lab at the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Administration here in the United States. Their special testing lab now produces a quarterly report that they release through NDEWS. where they report on what they're seeing in the specimens and drug specimens that they're testing in their lab. And they organize it in terms of the 5 main categories of NPS: synthetic cannabinoids, opioids, hallucinogens, tryptamines, and cathinones. And they do the quarterly reports, and then they do annual reports for us as well. They've been doing it for about 1.5 years. All of these are posted on our website, so if you want to take a closer look and actually see some of the numbers, you're welcome to go there and do that. We also collect data through our local resources because we want to make sure that we are cross-disciplinary, but also have access to current information that will allow us to learn about the newer drugs. And so we work through public health and law enforcement on a local level, and also biological specimen testing. And in addition to that, we complement all of that with our special collaborations, which I have been mentioning as I've been going along. So a couple of examples are the relationship that we have that I was just telling you about with the Special Testing and Research Lab and with the American Association of Poison Control Centers. This is an example of what we can learn from one of the national sources that we look at. This is NIFLS, the National Forensic Laboratory Information System, which is a national data set that's maintained by the Drug Enforcement Information. It's one of our key national indicators for identifying and tracking emerging drugs, because what they're doing is they're capturing toxicology results from federal, state, and local labs that are testing drug items seized through law enforcement operations. And there's obviously a lot more details there about what's captured and how it's captured and all of that, but that gives you an overview of what the data set is. It is something that we feel has been collected in a pretty consistent manner over time, and it is something that we can look at. They do reports themselves, the DEA, where they develop national estimates for different things or do special reports on particular drugs or types of drugs, but they also can do special data runs, which they do for us twice a year, so that we can monitor what's going on in our specific Sentinel sites as well and do some cross-site analyses of our own. So this graphic shows you fentanyl in the United States, and you can see how there was an initial little spike in 2006, and actually that spike was entirely related and traced back to a single lab in Mexico, and when that lab was shut down, it fell off, and we didn't see a spike starting again until 2014, and since then it's gone up in leaps and bounds and more than doubled between 2015 and 2016. And as an example of what we can see locally with our Sentinel sites, in 2015, 3 of our Sentinel community sites had fentanyl showing up in the top 10 drugs found, but in 2016, that number was up to 7, with most of those being east of the Mississippi in the eastern United States. These are our Sentinel sites, which I've mentioned a couple of times now. There are 12 of them. They represent all regions of the United States, and they range in size from a specific county or city up to a whole state. And they were selected in part because they had demonstrated their ability and willingness and interest in participating in something like this by being a part of the CEWG, but also because they are places that have shown historically to be locations where emerging drugs would tend to pop up. And they have experienced local researchers, and they have committed local resources to understanding and addressing the problems, so they have data available that they can access and report on. And we do provide a small annual honorarium both to our local community epidemiologists in each of these 12 sites and also to the members of our scientific advisory group, just to provide some incentive and support to them for the time they give to us. And so our Sentinel epidemiologists produce annual reports for us. They also participate in NDEWS Presents webinars and respond to queries that we may send out to ask for information over the course of the year about specific drugs or drug trends. The annual reports have 3 parts. There's a data snapshot, which is based on the data indicators that are tracked through NDEWS, and is basically a 2-page set of charts and graphics highlighting what we would consider to be the key findings for their site. There's a narrative that's a more detailed overview that's prepared by the local epidemiologists, where they go through by drug to explain and describe current trends and what's changed or what's new over the past year. And then there are also some site-specific tables and graphics that are created both by coordinating center staff and by our local researchers. So the primary and local data sources that they rely on and report on in their reports are treatment admissions, drug-related deaths, and poison center calls. Some of them also have some local law enforcement information and things like that that they add in as well. The primary focus is on emerging drugs and changing drug trends, and because we wanted to try to focus in the reports and be able to make it easy for people to pull out the most important information. But we also do provide our local researchers with the opportunity to include information about changes in their local laws and policies that might impact the trends that they're reporting on, and also results of any local research or special analyses that they may have done with their data. And a number of them have some ongoing qualitative research that they do, for instance, or have some special research that they may do through needle exchange programs and things like that. We have 2 years worth of reports, 2015 and 2016, that are available on our NDEWS site, and we're actually working on the 2017 reports with our local researchers now and hope to get them out in the next couple of months. And the other important thing that I wanted to talk about today is the hotspot study that is a collection of methodologies that we developed through NDEWS. The first one we did was with New Hampshire, and we have a basic, standard kind of protocol that we can follow, but we also think it's really important to be flexible with what we do, because we want to make sure that we're using methodologies that can address the research questions that the local experts are most interested in and that is most valuable to them for helping them address what's going on. And so these are some of the things that we did as a part of New Hampshire. We collected and reviewed available data and information. We identified some core contacts, which we did through the network and other resources that we had. We convened a planning committee of key people from law enforcement and public health and policy to help us focus in on what we wanted to do in the study and who we needed to talk to and to plan a site visit. And then I conducted a 3-day site visit where I met with approximately 45 experts in 4 different jurisdictions in the state of New Hampshire. And then to follow that up, we also contracted with local experts at Dartmouth and at the University of Maine to conduct 2 additional rapid studies to develop a more comprehensive understanding of current users of fentanyl and people who have died from fentanyl-related overdoses. And then we put all that together in a series of reports, which was a combination of the longer, more detailed, in-depth scientific reports, and then also some shorter pieces to really highlight key findings and introduce people to the hotspot approach. Now, there are other things that we could do as part of a hotspot. For instance, if it's relevant and useful to the local experts that we're working with, including biological testing of urine specimens. So to give you an example of the data that we look at that we consider available data, in New Hampshire, they actually had a work group that put together monthly reports that included information on fentanyl-related deaths. And so we were able to trace the sharp increase over the past few years there. And you can see fentanyl is the green line with the green triangles, and there was an increase from 18 in 2013 to 362 in 2016. So it more than doubled from 14 to 16. And one of the first special study that we did was an in-depth analysis of fentanyl-related drug intoxication deaths that occurred from January 2015 through September 2016. That was conducted by researchers at the University of Maine and also a researcher here at the University of Maryland who conducted some geospatial analyses as part of the study. So we assessed 540 deaths that were recorded during that time. There were in-depth case reviews completed by the researchers at the University of Maine of 505. And then there were also the geospatial analyses, such as the map that's here on this slide, that included the full sample. And so what we were able to learn from this, I'm not going to read all of the details and all of the bullets, but we were able to learn a lot about the demographics of the people who had died, their previous access and involvement in treatment, and their likelihood of contacting EMS and getting a response and that kind of thing. And one of the most important things we learned was that there was a lot of polydrug use going on, and the mean number of drugs found per decedent, in fact, was 6.2. 90% of decedents had more than one drug in their toxicologies, and 20% had 5 or more. I'm just checking my time so I can keep moving. And the second study we did was understanding opioid overdoses in New Hampshire, and that was conducted by researchers at Dartmouth and College, and they actually did in-depth interviews as a part of NDEWS with 20 users, 9 first responders, and 3 ED personnel. They actually did far more interviews than that, but what they reported on for us was specifically this subgroup. They again were able to get information on demographics and that kind of thing. But one of the things that we thought was really valuable that we learned from this qualitative approach was they were able to collect information from the consumers, the drug users, on how they first got involved with fentanyl. And they found 3 basic trajectories: early recreational use, intergenerational use, and opioid prescriptions for pain management. And so we thought there were some important implications for public health as a result of this hotspot approach, and we're looking forward to continuing to conduct hotspot studies as a part of NDEWS. So this is basically what we thought the implications were. Based on the interviews and medical examiner case reviews, fentanyl appears to be the primary cause of increased overdoses in New Hampshire, primarily due to fentanyl's potency and inconsistency in the various mixes and products that are available. That providers and responders must eliminate barriers to naloxone and increase availability of treatment, and they must diagnose and treat multiple drug use disorders in fentanyl users and provide comprehensive treatment for these people. And that although users expressed a fear of physical side effects from naloxone, neither the users or the responders who were interviewed as a part of the study had observed any common side effects from naloxone other than precipitated withdrawal and some agitation from that happening. And so I mentioned a couple of times now the different types of reports that we can do. These are just some screenshots there. These 2 are the longer, more scientific reports, and the one that has the blue box and the map on the first page is an example of one of our shorter versions where we have some summaries and important lessons learned and things like that. Another thing that we do that I mentioned earlier is the news scans. This is an example of the chart that I mentioned earlier. This one looks specifically at fentanyl and shows the increase from January 2015 through July 2017 in the number of reports. We can do it this way. Then if we see something going on here or a dramatic change, we might actually go and pull out the articles and do additional coding to find out more about what's being reported on and what the stories are actually related to. But the idea is that this kind of effort can provide a monthly snapshot of what's getting reported on and what people are talking about. This is an example of what I was talking about taking a more in-depth look, and also one of our shorter reports, the NDEWS News. And so just to wrap things up and go over some lessons learned, I think I agreed a lot with all of the things that Dr. Young and Dr. Patterson were talking about in terms of CENDU. It is important to utilize a combination of resources and sources. So you want to look at national sources, but you also want to look at specific sites, and you also want to develop other kinds of sources as well, like we've done through our different networks of people and some of the internal work we do in terms of geospatial analysis and the news scans and some of the social media work that we're doing. You want your research efforts and your methods to have a standard protocol, but also to be flexible, to allow you to do more in-depth assessments and to allow you to be able to address research questions that are most important and most useful for the people you're working for. And it's important to disseminate information in multiple formats and to do everything you can to maintain your partnerships and collaborations, because they are invaluable and they are the people that can really alert you to what's going on and what's changing and point you in the right direction. And so our challenges for the future are to develop more real-time information. And so part of doing that will be launching the Drug Outbreak Testing Service, or DOTS, which we'll be doing in the coming year. And Also, we want to continue to address the limits of self-reports by including biological testing to keep up with the rapid changes in NPS. And we want to continue doing hotspot studies to expand our understanding and the field's understanding in the states of regional and local drug trends. And lastly, we want to continue to explore social media platforms and expand what we're looking at beyond Twitter to drug forums and things like that, so we can understand not just how the media is reporting on drugs, but how regular people, common people across the United States are thinking about and talking about drugs as well. So this is my contact information, and you're certainly welcome to visit our website and email me directly if you have any questions. And as I mentioned earlier, we are in our 4th year of 5, and although we've put together a lot, we certainly recognize that we have a lot to learn from our colleagues in Canada and other researchers who will be participating in this series, and we certainly look forward to continuing to work from them and learning from them. So thank you very much, and that's about it for me. I think one question has come in, and that was a question from a viewer who wanted to know a little bit more about the New Hampshire death study. And the question is the fentanyl pharmaceutical or non-pharmaceutical? And if non-pharmaceutical, how was this determined? And so the answer there would be it was largely, basically mostly the non-pharmaceutical or illicit fentanyl. And you can learn more about this from Dr. Sorg's report, but this was determined through laboratory testing, yes. So I don't see any other questions, but if anybody thinks of anything, feel free to upload what you're doing. I'm going to see if I can close out of this, and then I'm going to share. Go and open our closing screen here. And I just want to alert you to what we have coming up. Thank our speakers again for participating with us this afternoon. And our next GDEWS webinar will feature researchers and experts from the National Drug and Alcohol Research Center in Australia and the Social and Health Outcomes Research and Evaluation and Wariki Research Center in New Zealand. And that will be on September 26th at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So we hope you'll be able to join us then. And in the meantime, you will also be getting an announcement about our upcoming NDEWS Presents webinar that will provide you with a lot more information about the New Hampshire hotspot study, and will include presentations from the lead researchers on the 2 studies I highlighted, Dr. Marsh at Dartmouth College and Dr. Sorg at the University of Maine. So I hope that you all will be able to join us then, and I hope that you'll be willing to take just a couple more minutes for us to complete a short 4-question poll. And I'm going to launch that now. So as we're letting people finish up with the survey, Dr. Newcombe, do you have any closing comments you'd like to make today?
You know, I'd just like to thank all the presenters sincerely for 2 really good and very informative presentations. We've got some really good insights into how the 2 systems work and the lessons learned. So I think for us in jurisdictions where we're still looking at a prototype and how our early warning or drug monitoring systems might work, these are really valuable lessons. And so thank you for sharing. And thank you for the viewers. We do hope that you can join us for the next webinars that we've got planned. And that's probably all from me. And thank you. Goodbye from New Zealand, I suppose I can say.
All right. Well, have a good day over there. And thank you again, Dr. Young and Dr. Patterson. We really appreciated and enjoyed your presentation today.
Oh, it was our pleasure. Thank you very much for having us.
All right, so it looks like the voting has slowed down now. So I think we're probably ready to move on and end the meeting. So I'm going to end the polling now. And close out and stop share and end the meeting. So goodbye, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks again.
Thanks, Matthew. Thanks, Erin.